Hey friends, I wanted to turn you on to a particular thing that I'm passionate about. It's the Meadow IoT platform from Wilderness Labs. In fact, I'm so passionate about it, I personally invested in this startup. This is a really great company that's mission is building and maintaining hardware that is as fast and easy as web apps or mobile apps. This is an embedded device OS that includes a premium .NET experience. We're talking about .NET on microcontrollers. And with Meadow.cloud, you just drop in a client library, you get secure over-the-air updates, crash reporting logs, all the kind of stuff you'd want when you're creating an IoT project that has to talk to an enterprise back end. It's the only IoT device platform that offers modern .NET applications on embedded microcontrollers. These are .NET apps at full native speed with native just-in-time compilation. They're called Wilderness Labs. It's the Meadow platform with enterprise data integrations with things like Meadow Cloud. It's fantastic stuff. Check it out at wildernesslabs.co. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today we're talking with Dr. Pam Hurley from Hurley Write. She's a doctorate in technical communication from the University of South Carolina. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am very excited to talk to you because I've been talking to a lot of folks in the technical writing and documentation space, and I'm starting to realize that after almost 32 years in tech, that I may not be a very good writer.
Well, it's interesting how so many people will say, hey, I'm a great writer. And then you actually look at their writing and it's like, maybe not. And good writing is relative, right? Depending on the organizational standards and expectations and things like that.
Is good writing an objective thing? Like, is it one of those things where you, Dr. Hurley, say, Scott, I don't think you're a very good writer. And I say, well, says you. Or can we measure it and actually indicate whether or not someone is a good writer or not? Or is it really just an opinion?
No, I think it's interesting because in academia, we're kind of taught to believe that it is subjective. And a lot of that is mimicked in the workplace as well. For reviewers, for instance, they will focus on pet peeves or focus on, it wasn't written the way that I would have written it, and then it becomes subjective when it's really not. It can be measured because good writing really boils down to strategy and critical thinking. And so if you can think, you can write. But unfortunately, that's not the way that we're taught. And in academia, we're often taught that it's a very linear process where, you do an outline and then you do a draft and then you're done, instead of thinking about it as a problem that we're trying to solve. And that really is all it is writing is just problem solving on paper.
I have been on a number of calls today at my day job talking with people of varying levels in their career, some early in career, younger people, and some people who are a little farther along, like myself. And the one thing that I found is that a lot of them are looking at an empty page, and they stare at this empty page and they're overwhelmed.
Yes.
And then they start to doubt themselves, and it's this spiral. And I always tell them, just start slapping the keyboard. It doesn't matter, but if you sit there, you're hurting yourself. Is that good advice?
That's great advice. That's absolutely right. It's like anything else, getting started. Writing, unfortunately, in the workplace is people treat it as something personal, as though they're looking at your diary or something like that, instead of thinking about it as just put something down. Your first draft should not be your final draft anyway. And one of the things we talk about in our courses is this idea of pre-writing, whether that's mind mapping or whether that's clustering or whether that's brainstorming or whether that's free writing. Yeah, just put the words out there and see what happens. And it may be total garbage. That's okay. But the garbage is out there and you can dismiss the garbage. But if you make the garbage the first draft, that's a problem. So that's fantastic advice. Just start writing.
This is good. Okay, cool. So let me ask you another one, because this is all real. These are all real things that are happening to me every day. You have like the dictation on your phone, and you have like Siri. You can talk to it. You can push the microphone button. You can start talking. I had to drive to Seattle to go to the home office. I had a 4-hour drive, so I just hit record. I'm driving. I'm on Bluetooth, and I'm doing speech to text. And I ended up with 2 pages of absolute trash. But there were a couple of pretty good paragraphs in there. Is that a way to start?
Absolutely. Right. So, one of the things we need to understand, and again, I used to be an academician, so I can say this, the way that writing is taught in schools is garbage. It's trash. And the reason I say that is because it's taught as one, there's only one way to do things. Again, you outline, then you write a draft. Instead of thinking about there are lots of different ways that people learn, and there's lots of different ways that people approach tasks. I hate outlining. I remember when I was in high school, the teacher said, well, you have to write an outline and then write the paper. I'm no good at outlining. I wrote the paper and then I went back and wrote the outline because that's not the way that I learn. That's not the way that I think. And so there's lots of different ways to approach writing tasks. So if dictation works for you, try it. If free writing works for you, do that. Brainstorming, mind mapping, a variety of these strategies can work. But to just assume that there's only one way to do things is erroneous and doesn't do anybody any good, to be quite honest.
That is really interesting because I was talking with John Warner, who believes that the 5-paragraph essay has basically ruined writing for an entire generation.
Totally agree. It's ridiculous. I mean, in what other world is there that it's just, it can only be 5 sentences. That's it. And then what happens is people will focus on, well, I have 4, so I'm going to take this good sentence and make it into 2 sentences, which makes it harder to read. And, another thing that we hear oftentimes is that brevity is created via short sentences. Totally incorrect. As long sentences can be just as readable as a short sentence, right? Depending on the complexity of the sentence. And you have to always understand who you're writing for. What do they expect? I agree. These formulaic responses or formulaic ways of teaching writing are just ridiculous. And it's incredibly unfortunate because a lot of folks hang on to these. Once they graduate from college and they get into the workplace, they're still hanging on to these antiquated, ridiculous methodologies.
Okay, so I'm hearing that we are aggressively in agreement.
Yes.
The way that we've learned how to write is problematic at best. I've heard both that learning styles are a thing. I believe that they are. But I've also seen research recently that said, that whole learning style thing, this person's an audio learner, this one's a visual learner. Now they're telling me it's not a thing. But what I'm hearing you say is try stuff until it works. Be intentional and don't try to fit into somebody else's box.
That's exactly right. And I think a lot of people, especially the professionals we work with, don't like to write. And when you don't like to do something, you try to find the quickest and easiest way to accomplish that task. And so for a lot of them, they don't try other things. The other issue that a lot of organizations have is, we have a lot of clients, we have a lot of organizations that pay a lot of lip service to how important writing is, but they don't give their writers the time and the space to try various things and to really write. And we hear all the time, well, I don't have much time to write. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't do the other because I don't have the time. And it's like, well, organizations, if they want their writers to produce better documents, must give them the time and the space to do that. They give them time to practice other problems and to solve other problems. They don't expect a problem to be solved in 15 minutes. But oftentimes with documents, that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, we have a document we have to write every couple of months for some vice presidents, and it's called a pillar document. And it's one big giant pile where 40 people are in a 40-page document, and we try to have one voice. And I get overwhelmed with who is the audience? Who's reading this thing anyway? Are we writing this for one person? Are we writing this for everyone? Is this a document that lives for a month, or is it a document that actually, is something where people will use as a reference? How important is thinking about my audience for writing?
Incredibly important. And all those questions that you just asked are questions that should be asked of the group, because what happens with a multi-author document oftentimes is it'll be assigned. So you take this and you take that and you take the other, instead of let's all get together at the beginning and let's brainstorm. Who are you writing for? What do we know about them? How are they going to use the document? All of those are incredibly important questions. Now, it may seem like an extra step in the process to take that brainstorming session happen, but you're going to save a tremendous amount of time and energy because it's impossible for 40 people or however many it is to write in one voice. But if everybody's starting from the same page, then that's going to be much more likely. The other thing we advocate with multi-author documents is that you meet throughout the writing of the document to make sure everybody's on the same page and everybody's aligned. It's just kind of incredible that we treat writing oftentimes as a siloed activity that every person does individually instead of treating it as the document is the deliverable. So whether your name is on it or not, every document that's written in every organization has everybody's name on it. And so everybody should be involved in making sure that it's the best that it can be, then it's an accurate reflection of the organization.
I was trying to explain to my now senior 17-year-old son that life is just a big group project and you're going to have to get used to it.
I like that. That's awesome.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about your bona fides because I feel like everybody at work who I end up bumping into who has a BA in English feels like they can really criticize my work. No disrespect to any of our friends that have BAs in English, but help me understand the difference between a BA in English, which a lot of people have, and a doctorate in technical communication, because you're taking it to another level. And I assume that there's quite a bit of rigor that's more formal than a typical English degree.
Yeah, we learn a lot more about the theory of writing. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, theory. You don't need to know theory, but you do need to know theory. And the theory is based on this idea of who are you writing for? And so a lot of people, say, well, who's your audience? Okay, well, my audience is Joe. Well, Joe, just saying your audience is Joe doesn't tell you anything. But if we do a deep dive, if we do a rhetorical analysis, which is what we're talking about when we talk about a doctorate, you do much more in terms of theory, and that theory can turn into practical application. A BA in English is going to give you the basics, if you will, and basics is not the right word, but it's just going to give, you take literature classes and writing fundamentals. Yeah, maybe fundamentals is a better word of writing. You take a lot of literature classes and things like that. English majors, in my humble opinion, are some of the smartest people on the planet because they're thinkers. You have to be able to analyze and think and those kinds of things. The other thing that I will say about that is that just because you can write well doesn't mean you can teach writing and doesn't mean that you're a good reviewer. So I would just put that out there because a lot of organizations will say, oh, Sue's got a BA in English, so she can review our work and edit it and all that kind of fun stuff. And it's like, yeah, probably not, maybe, I don't know.
Well, it puts a lot of pressure on folks like that because that absolutely does happen. We've all been in organizations where they have, here, the English major will then be our copywriter or our reviewer. And that doesn't lift the entire organization up. And I know that a big part of your company and your goals are to not just make one person a better writer, but to make an entire organization a better writing organization.
That's exactly right. And one of the things that we have instituted lately is a communication audit where we go in, we try to understand what are the root causes of some of the communication problems you're having. For instance, you might have person A who reviews and turns back documents with tons of comments on them, some of them pet peeves, that kind of thing. You might have person B who returns documents with useful, thoughtful comments that really improve the document's value. So we do that. We also have a standards class, and the standards class is for stakeholders so that they have a good understanding of what we're going to teach in the class and the why behind it. Why are we teaching? So that they can support the folks they put through the class long term. So we try to present an entire package, not just a writing course.
Mm-hmm. And you have experience in different genres of writing. Like you developed a graduate level course at Duke on scientific writing. I assume that scientific writing is different than the kind of technical writing that I, as a programmer, think about, or writing documentation and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fundamentals of writing are the same, the foundations, knowing who you're writing for, all those things you talked about earlier. But when you talk about scientific writing, it's a lot more detailed than, for instance, business writing, which business writing is going to be primarily about emails and memos and things like that. When you think about technical writing, it's going to be about user manuals, standard operating procedures, and those kinds of things. But a lot of it just depends. We do a lot of work with pharmaceutical organizations who are writing for the FDA. That's a totally different thing than helping an organization we do a lot of work for environmental consultants. That's a different kind of writing than writing for the FDA.
Is a good way to be a better writer to read more and to find things you admire and read them?
Absolutely. And read a variety of things. I mean, we find a lot of professionals we work with, they tend to read the same things over and over and over again instead of reading novels and short stories and newspaper articles and those kinds of things and this is borne out by research. This isn't something that I've made up or that you've made up, but research bears out if you do a minimum of 15 minutes of reading a day, you'll be a better writer. And along those same lines, you should do a minimum of 15 minutes of writing every day. So both of those things hand in hand will in fact improve one's writing. And it's common sense. I mean, it makes perfect sense that would happen.
And I want to actually agree with you and say yes, because I'm going to say writing email doesn't count. That's not the kind of writing you're talking about.
I agree with that. No, I'm talking about 15 minutes of uninterrupted writing, regardless of, and to your point earlier, people get overwhelmed by the blank page or the blank screen, just sitting there writing about anything. We tell people all the time, start out writing, today I had coffee for breakfast, and see where it takes you. I mean, it may take you on a great journey and you end up talking about something that, you have some really great ideas, or it's, again, as we talked about earlier, it may be total garbage. That's okay too.
It seems to me like you don't think that there's any wasted paragraphs. Even a paragraph that gets written and immediately deleted, there was not a waste in that motion.
No, not a waste at all. Everything you write is valuable in some way, shape, form, or fashion. I would much rather see people produce 5 pages of total junk than sit there for hours and hours and hours and hours to produce 2 paragraphs that probably still need to be rewritten. We have a great podcast. And one of the podcast episodes is about your brain and your brain on writing and how your brain works when it writes. And it is just problem solving. And if you're sitting there constantly trying to figure out the perfect solution to the problem, you're never going to do that. But if you let your brain solve the problem through the writing process, you're going to come up with a great solution. It works. Again, research bears this out. It's not just me saying this.
And that's your podcast, The Writing Docs, correct? That's on Spotify?
That is correct. Yes. Have you listened?
I have. I listened to the one from July.
Nice. Thank you for doing that.
My pleasure. Got to do your research, right? Whether you're writing or whether you're having a podcast like me, you got to do your research.
That's right.
Here's the thing, though. You say that there's no wasted keystrokes, but I think writing emails is a huge waste. So I've been telling people for years, rather than writing an email, write a document and then send a link to the document in email, because the email will be long forgotten. But if they can get to the Google Doc or the SharePoint site or whatever, that document will live on and they can put their comments in the document. They're never going to find anything. Email is where keystrokes go to die, but documents get shared.
Totally agree. This is a vendor a few years ago, and his emails were so long. Every time I got one, I just wouldn't read it. So we have to think about expectations. What do readers expect? So if I hand you a newspaper or a magazine article, you have a certain expectation when you sit down to read that it's going to be this or that or the other, and it's going to be certain length, and there's going to be headings in it and that kind of thing. The expectation for an email is that it's going to be short and easy to read. And so when you have something extra, put it, to your point, put it in as an attachment or make it a link to a Google Doc and make the email short and to the point. One of the things that drives me crazy is people in writing email now, they start every email with, "Oh, hope all is well." And just like, stop. But this is what people do. Or, these out of office messages, "I'm currently out of the office." Well, we know you're out of the office because we got your out of office. My point is the word currently isn't necessary. Think about what it is you're trying to achieve. If I start an email and well, I'm trying to be polite when I start with "hope all is well," but everybody else does that too. So how are you presenting yourself? Right? So it's that kind of thing. And if you overwhelm somebody with a lengthy email, what are you telling them? Right? So it goes back to the image of, people judge you based on the documents you write, whether you like it or not. That's what they do.
So I have always been a big fan of deliberate practice and intentionality. And anytime I get overwhelmed, I just stop and I go, what the heck am I doing here? What am I doing? What is my goal? Who is the audience? Why am I doing this? And if I need to go for a walk, I go for a walk. However, how do you take the kind of intentionality that you're telling me to apply to my writing and not turn that into analysis paralysis?
Oh, exactly right. Well, I think one of the ways that you do that is, one of the things we talk about in all of our classes is the beauty of planning. You should apply the 80-20 rule. 80% of your time should be spent planning and 20% should be writing. Most people don't do that, right? They start writing and hope for the best. They send it out for review and it gets back and whatever. But if you spend the time planning, who is your reader? And when I talk about planning, I'm talking about planning on paper. I'm not talking about planning in your head, because you've got a million things going on in your brain all the time. So doing that deep dive into who your readers are, what do they expect, right? As we talked about with emails, what do they know about the topic? One of the things we see so often is a document where there's so much background information that the reader already knows that you wasted the reader's time trying to go through that. Planning, we call it the outcome statement. And the outcome statement is simply a roadmap. What's your roadmap? How are you going to get to your conclusion? I always bring up are you familiar with John Irving, the author John Irving, A Prayer for Owen Meany?
Oh, yeah. I love Owen Meany. That's one of my favorite books.
Love that book. But he starts his novels with the last sentence, and then he works backwards. But people don't do that when they write. They start from the beginning, and they feel like it's a linear process. So they start at the beginning and work to the end. Whereas if they knew where they were going, right? If I write that outcome statement and I know where I'm going, it's going to be much easier for me to take that journey. If I'm visiting the big ball of yarn in Kansas, I'm not going to just get in the car and drive. I'm going to plan the route. Right. So we talk about that a lot, reverse engineering the document.
That is so obvious, but probably not something I'm ever doing, because in meetings, we start meetings with, all right, folks, why are we having this meeting? What's our goal here? What's success look like for this meeting? But now I'm not staring at that white page wondering what's the success look like for this document, and I should.
Exactly. Everybody should. Most people, if they started there, they would be more successful, because what that does is it automatically limits the kind and the amount of information that you can include. Because if my goal is to get the reader to do X, then there's only a certain amount of information that I can include. But if I start at the beginning and I don't know where I'm going, then obviously I'm going to include a lot of unnecessary information, which we see a lot. I mean, professionals across the board, unnecessary information is probably one of the worst things they do.
Speaking of unnecessary, as my 17-year-old is starting to write his college essays, I am noticing that because he's an emerging young person, he's not quite plugged in. He's unfortunately leaning on tools like Grammarly, the thesaurus in Word, and he'll pick a word, which is a perfectly cromulent word, and then he'll pick a fancier word because it felt fancier. How do we keep people from using these tools as a crutch?
Yeah, and unfortunately, and again, I'm going to say this because I used to be an academician, but that's what the academy wants. That's what schools want. They want people to use big words. They want them to write 10 pages when they could, and I'm guilty of that too. I used to get my freshmen to write a 10-page paper. Now, the thinking behind it was rational, right? I want you to stretch yourself and that kind of thing. But then when you take that information and they apply it in the workplace, it just doesn't work. So we do a really poor job of preparing people for the workplace. Colleges don't do a good job in terms of writing. I'm not saying other subjects, but in terms of writing, most schools do a poor job. Most students have to take 2 semesters. That's it. And I've had engineers say to me, well, I didn't know I was going to have to write so much when I got into this job. Well, and why? Because universities don't prepare them for it. So there has to be a change in the academic world for things to change. And I don't foresee that happening anytime soon.
Well, sorry to take like that downer statement and maybe make it a bigger downer, but now we've got things like ChatGPT, which are just the thesaurus on steroids with a little statistics sprinkled in for good fun, where, this very large language model is effectively just picking the next obvious word and kind of running downhill without a plan. What's your feeling about that? Is it just going to continue to make people poor writers, or can it be used as an effective tool for some reason?
I think it can be used as an effective tool. I do think, since it's in its infancy, I don't think that we have wrestled with that enough. I do know that I have read things that were written by humans versus ChatGPT, and I can tell the difference. It's very robotic. And the other thing about writing is, I don't know if you've heard, but Chobani is hiring a copywriter, $300,000 a year.
Chobani, the yogurt?
Yogurt. And people are going berserk. But when you think about it, Chobani has a unique brand voice, and ChatGPT just isn't going to be able to capture that. Now, maybe 5 years from now or 10 years from now, it will. But I think what's going to happen, and I don't know this obviously because I can't predict the future, but I think what's going to happen is that people are going to become much more savvy in terms of being able to differentiate between the human touch, if you will, in ChatGPT. I do think it can be used as a tool, for prompts and things like that. But as a substitute for writing, we're not there yet.
The way I was trying to explain to my kids was that it's fun and it's exciting and it's a burst of serotonin to eat a bunch of gummy worms, but the payoff is usually a tummy ache and you kind of go, oh, I'm filled with regret. The same thing happens when you write an essay with a very large language model. Protein and a balanced diet and a book where you go, oh man, what a great word. That was the perfect word. I love that I'm a highlighter. I highlight stuff. And I have all my highlights from all my Kindle books when I like, oh, that isn't just a good thesaurus word, but they picked the perfect word, that Hemingway-esque word where you go like, ooh, that word scratched a neuron. I want to be that kind of a writer, not the kind of like, oh, I said mellifluous because it felt good in my mouth.
Right. Right. And we have that all the time. And people just try to use the biggest word they possibly can, thinking, no, it makes me look smarter. And one of the things I try to explain to the professionals we work with, it really doesn't. What makes you look smart is and I think it's Einstein who said this. I know it's probably been attributed to other people other than him, but if you can't explain it simply, then you simply don't understand it. And so when you think about who your readers are, are there readers other than a primary, or they're secondary, or they're non-technical readers? As you pointed out earlier, the longevity of the document is somebody, language changes so rapidly. Is somebody going to be able to pick up your document 5 years from now and understand it? So, we always have to think about these things. It's not just the word of the day that we should be using. We have to think about the longevity and multiple readers and things like that.
You also do courses on giving great presentations. So there's kind of like this three-legged stool. There's the long-form business or technical document. There's the PowerPoint, God help us, using PowerPoint as a word like Kleenex, even though we mean, right, presentations. And then there's also the actual communication. You focus primarily on the written word, but isn't that a three-legged stool?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And we also do offer a reviewing class, because one of the things that we found is if the writers are learning what they learn, but the reviewers are continuing to do the same things, then that's a problem. And so we teach the reviewers how to review. And one of the things we hear a lot is, well, I made this comment on their documents 25 times and they're not doing it. And then the other thing we hear is, well, I just rewrite their documents because it's just easier. And what that facilitates is this learned helplessness, because why in the world would I want to improve my writing skills if I know you're just going to rewrite it for me? I wouldn't, right? Because I've got other things to do and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the concepts are the same in terms of presentations. Who are you presenting to? How to use PowerPoints effectively. I mean, PowerPoints, to your point, are the bane of our existence, I think. My goodness. And everybody complains, oh, that was death by PowerPoint. And then they go and they do exactly the same thing. We were working with an organization, this was about a month ago, and oh my gosh, their PowerPoints were sales, and it's just, they would have one PowerPoint slide with the same information represented 3 different ways. And I'm like, let's just pick the simplest way and be done. Why are you doing that? I mean, but that's the point. You have to have a why. With whatever you do, when you talk about writing, you have to have a why. And if you have a good reason for doing that, have at it. But if you don't have a good reason, if there's no why behind that, then you need to rethink what you're doing.
Yeah, this is great. We've actually been starting doing writing things down culture. We hear a lot about Bezos and folks over at Amazon, how they really do less PowerPoints, no PowerPoints, and a lot more documents. One of our executives is now having people come to the meeting, and we sit quietly in a room and we read the document, so that this argument of like, I didn't have time for the pre-read is not a thing. We're all going to sit. Here's a 5-page document that we worked really hard on. Everybody shut up. We're going to sit here for 5 minutes and quietly read it and then talk about it. And it's been very effective.
That's awesome. No, I love that idea. That's a great idea. Because, I mean, people, we talk about this in our classes too. If you send me a document and I know you're a poor writer, I probably ain't going to put your document at the bottom of the pile, because people have to make decisions, right? We're all time constrained and that kind of thing, and bombarded with information. So I have to make good decisions about what I'm going to spend my time on. And people don't think about that. They think, oh, if I write it, they're going to read it. Well, not necessarily.
Well, this has been a joy to chat with you. You are great fun, and I'm sure that the instructors at Hurley Write are just as much fun.
They're fabulous.
I know you have self-paced courses for writing for engineers, which I'm really interested in, but you also do virtual training, on-site training. Anyone who wants to learn how to write can go and check this out at Hurley Write, Hurley, write.com. Right now I'm at /courses, and I'm reading all about the courses that are available. Thank you so much, Dr. Pam Hurley.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it very much, Scott. Thank you for having me.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.